Take it away, Emma.
Hi, everybody.
Oops.
Thank you for joining on today's discussion about sensory's impact on social competence. I am your speaker, Emma Raggio. So a little bit about me. Dr. May Benson kind of said a little bit, but I am a Doctor of Occupational Therapy student at Widener University, completing my doctoral capstone project and experience here at OTR Inc. with my site mentor, Dr. Teresa May Benson. My project is called The Development of the Sensory Integration, Praxis, and Social Competence Impact on Occupational Performance. The name is still a work in progress. Um, it consists of a 30-item all-in-one proxy report assessment tool that assesses those areas in relation to occupational performance. In my experience, I have developed the assessment tool and conducted a face and content validity check on the assessment tool items to ensure that they target the content related to sensory processing, praxis, and social competency areas in a way that they were also easy to understand to promote engagement from parents and caregivers to be able to provide the necessary information about their child. So the objectives for this discussion: by the end of the presentation, the viewer will be able to understand the foundations of sensory integration, also known as SI, and social competence, be able to explore the relationship between sensory integration and social competence and how they work together. And finally, be able to apply sensory integration strategies to practice supporting individuals with social competence challenges. So getting right into it, sensory integration is a function of the central nervous system, also known as the CNS, that allows the brain to receive, interpret, and organize sensory input from the body and environment to support outputs, including regulation of arousal, behavior, and performance of skills to enable participation in meaningful and necessary activities alone and in the relation to others. Efficient sensory processing is reflected in the child's sensory motor development, learning, and ability to produce adaptive responses through the concept of praxis, which we will get into a little bit later. Integration occurs in the brainstem and cortex in associated areas where the brain makes interpretations, combining visual and spatial input and adding meaning to the stimuli. Deficits in learning and behavior are commonly due to poor sensation processing in that central nervous system. Sensory integration theory was developed by Dr. Jean Ayres to explain the relationships between deficits in interpreting sensation from the body and environment and its difficulties with academic and motor learning. Looking at the sensory systems, we have our 5 basic systems, including taste, smell, vision, audition, and touch, as well as 2 hidden senses known as movement, also known as vestibular, and proprioception. The taste and smell systems are important and necessary to understand. However, for the sake of this short course today, we are going to focus on other systems as they are more involved in the developmental sensory motor coordination aspects necessary for social participation and praxis. The visual system plays a critical role in supporting postural control, balance, and the development of visual perceptual skills and spatial orientation through its involvement in processing motion, depth and form. Located in the cerebral cortex of the brain, the visual system includes the eyes and 6 extraocular muscular pairs, which facilitate ocular motor functions, including convergence, divergence, accommodation, saccadic eye movements, smooth pursuits, and the vestibular ocular reflex. Visual input also contributes to motion detection, spatiotemporal processing, environmental awareness, and motor planning, all of which are important to adaptive responses and participation in learning and skilled performance. The auditory system is important for supporting receptive communication and spatial and temporospatial awareness of the environment. It consists of the outer, middle, and inner ear, also known as the cochlear apparatus, that combines the vestibular system for the perception of sound necessary for environmental orientation, modulation of arousal levels, and emotional regulation. Touch, also known as the tactile system, is composed of mechanoreceptors in the skin, which send sensory input via neural pathways to the brain's receiving cortex. It processes a wide range of tactile inputs, including light and unexpected touch, pain, temperature, vibration, deep touch pressure, conscious proprioception, and two-point discrimination. This system supports self-regulation, body awareness, also known as body schema, spatial orientation, fine motor skills, praxis, and overall motor performance. The vestibular system processes movement and is located in the inner ear, comprised of the semicircular canals and otolith organs. It is essential for the development of balance, muscle tone, posture, and motor coordination. It functions with the proprioceptive system to support postural stability and body extension, as well as the visual system and the cerebellum to maintain a stable visual field during movement, which is vital for orientation and functional performance in activities. And finally, the proprioceptive system relies primarily on working input from receptors located in the muscles and tendons, while also receiving signals from skin mechanoreceptors. It functions in collaboration with the tactile and vestibular systems to regulate arousal levels and facilitate postural control, body awareness, force discrimination, and praxis. This is an image of Dr. Ayer's original model of sensory integration theory. It looks at those 5 major sensory systems in this first level and how they develop the foundational mechanisms of eye movement, posture, balance, muscle tone, gravity security, sucking, eating, mother-infant bond, and tactile comfort in the next level of integration activities. Moving on to progress in the next level, including perception of the body, bilateral coordination, motor planning, activity level, attention span, and emotional stability. Then higher level outputs in the 4th level, like speech and language, hand-eye coordination, visual perception, and purposeful activity. And finally, functional end products here on the right that rely heavily on the integration with cognition, such as the ability to concentrate and organize, self-esteem, self-control, self-confidence, academic learning ability, capacity for abstract thought and reasoning, and specializations of each side of the brain and body. And we will come back to this image later on. So sensory input is integrated through modulation and discrimination. Looking at modulation first, sensory modulation is a process in which we assess sensory input from the stimuli, such as intensity, frequency, duration, complexity, and novelty, and regulate the body in response by adjusting the sensory threshold based on the relevance of the input to maintain homeostasis, which is a sense of calm and equilibrium. Behavioral responses associated with sensory modulation are reflected in arousal, focus, attention, emotion, and self-regulation. Modulation is the brain's ability to regulate and respond appropriately to sensory input and involves identifying the value of input and deciding if it's important or not. If it is not important, we make an habituating response to raise the threshold where we don't perceive the stimuli unless there is change to it. If we do decide that the stimulus is important, then we will evaluate if it is positive, negative, or neutral. If it is neutral, we will make a habitual response, just like before, where we raise that threshold and we say to ourselves, okay, we don't need that, so we won't pay attention to it. If it is positive or negative, the thresholds are dropped and it becomes which allows us to become more in tune with the surrounding sensory environment. If it is positive, we will turn towards it, like if someone calls our name, like in preparation for us to catch a ball or begin a social interaction. And if it is negative, we will either have an increased arousal, which is a change in physiological state, resulting in a defensive response, or problems with attention resulting in distractibility. Defensive responsibilities include flight, fright, or fright behaviors. If those behaviors are in response to stimuli that others don't view as threatening or have a greater intensity response than other people do, in our society, it is viewed as a bad behavior. For example, if a child screams in response to someone chewing loudly, it is perceived as a bad behavior or a behavior problem, which is not always the case. Moving on to sensory discrimination, it is the ability to assess, identify, and interpret the salient qualities in relation to spatial and temporal aspects of sensory input to prepare for motor output for skill performance. After sensory input is processed in the central nervous system, a motor response is generated to muscles for praxis and adaptive responses to demonstrate behaviors or skills. That detection and identification of salient qualities of sensory allows us to be able to tell two inputs apart. The information that is processed varies according to each sensory system. The vestibular input provides information to differentiate the body's positioning, which includes whether it's upside down or right side up, whether it is moving or not, if it is moving, what direction it is moving, and what speed at which it moves. Sensory input provides information for visual perceptual skills when differentiating size, shapes, letters or numbers, colors, patterns, orientations, and depth perception. Auditory input provides information to differentiate similar sounds, pitch, volume, duration, and direction or location of the sound. Proprioceptive input provides information on body positioning in space from awareness of joints and muscles. It differentiates how much force is used, the rate and timing of movements, and the ability to recognize certain movement patterns. And finally, the tactile system input provides information to differentiate the location of touch on the body and the size, shape, texture, and weight of objects through the pressure and touch it detects. The tactile system is also crucial for body schema, which is that body awareness, which is the mental image of that awareness of the body's boundaries for where the body begins and ends. It is important to know and discriminate sensory input effectively in order to complete praxis and adaptive responses, as we can't make any motor responses without sensory input. So back when I was talking about the sensory systems, you heard me talk about this concept of praxis. According to Dr. Jean Ayres, praxis is the neurological response by which cognition detects motor action. Motor or action planning is that intermediary process that bridges ideation and motor execution to enable adaptive interactions with the physical world. So praxis supports an individual's ability to develop, plan, sequence, and execute motor actions required to produce an adaptive response to environmental demands. It is essentially that thinking side of movement and how we develop an idea and figure out how to do it effectively through interactions with objects and the environment. So there are four components of praxis: ideation, motor planning, execution of that movement, and the feedback. Ideation is coming up with an idea of what to do. It is essential to understand that it is not creativity. It is simply generating a goal for an action, an idea for how to achieve that goal, given experience through their current external environment, as well as internal memories of past experience. Motor planning involves figuring out how your body will do the idea that you came up with in ideation. It is choosing the steps that are involved in the movement, organization of them in the correct sequence, timing them appropriately, and so forth. Execution is actually initiating, carrying out, and terminating the motor sequence from the plan with appropriate touch, pressure, and spatial awareness. And finally, we're looking at the feedback where we can evaluate our execution and adapt it if necessary based on how it is going. A breakdown in any component of praxis makes social and functional problem solving more difficult for the individual. Looking at types of dyspraxia, decreased sensory discrimination of tactile, vestibular, and proprioceptive inputs is commonly related to dysfunctions of praxis. So we have somatodyspraxia, which consists of somatosensory-based motor planning deficits that impact an individual's ability to organize the necessary plan for purposeful behavior due to poor body schema and other tactile discrimination challenges. This means that the individual should be able to take in, integrate, and organize sensory information from the environment in order to plan for the execution of motor movement to support their behavior response, but there is a breakdown in function somewhere. Dr. Ayres suggests that sensory processing challenges related to body schema are the main boundary for the effective organization of body movement, as awareness of body schema is necessary for motor planning. Essentially, the difficulty of knowing where your body is in space makes it difficult to plan and execute movements. Looking at the bilateral integration and sequencing type of dyspraxia, it consists of vestibular and proprioceptive processing challenges that impact the ability to motor plan and coordinate both sides of the body and sequence movements in relation to timing and spatial skills. These individuals may be okay with simple sequencing tasks, but are challenged with longer, more complex actions. They also have difficulty coordinating the segmentation of the top and bottom of their body, developing trunk rotation and skills that require timing, anticipation, and movement through space, like propelling on a swing, skipping, throwing and catching a ball, cutting with scissors, or even stabilizing paper while we write. Individuals with dyspraxia commonly demonstrate poor motor performance that may be observed as awkward and uncoordinated, clumsy, have poor balance, drop or bump into things, and are challenged with accessing basic motor skills like throwing, catching, kicking, running, jumping, hopping, cutting, coloring, painting, and writing. The behaviors often lead to carryover and difficulty with accessing the skills required for activities of daily living and play, both of which are necessary occupations that rely on the development and coordination. So it is important to remember that praxis is social. It is a skilled behavior that involves praxis and adaptive responses that inherently rooted in the functions of play. Play involves constantly generating new ideas like to build a fort, pretend to be a princess in a tower, traveling through a rainforest, or playing a game of soccer. The individuals need to be able to plan how to navigate those actions necessary to engage in the aspects of the game with their body or objects in their environment, like arranging the cushions, finding a chair to stand on, using a jungle gym as a rainforest, or aiming at the ball. They then need to execute those motor actions to actually engage in the game themselves, which would involve use of grabbing and arranging the cushions and blankets, climbing on top of the chair, running through the jungle gym over various surfaces, and kicking the ball. Evaluating the feedback to ensure that the plan was executed correctly, like the fort is supportive, the movements were coordinated enough to get on top of the chair to pretend it is a tower, being able to adapt to the structural challenges within the jungle gym to reach the other side, and finally kick the ball with enough force and accuracy to reach the target or pier that they are kicking to. Individuals with praxis challenges are often aware of what is difficult for them to accomplish, which results in them avoiding these situations or activities if they cannot navigate and execute the motor plans required of them. Behaviors associated with dysregulation or dyspraxia during play activities can be misunderstood by peers as disruptive, leading to social isolation. We must continue to remember that praxis is a higher level function that depends on well-integrated sensory systems, and if those sensory systems are not providing the right feedback, behavior and adaptive responses essential to learning are going to be challenged as well, including how to use the right amount of touch and pressure when playing with peers and how to build tolerance of others' proximity in relation to ourselves. When they see peers successfully engaging in activities that are difficult for them, they experience reduced self-esteem and self-confidence in their abilities to do the same. And over time, that self-confidence and willingness to engage may decrease, reinforcing that isolation and decreasing opportunities to be social with same-age peers. So now looking at social competency. Social competence reflects an individual's ability to discriminate the demands of the social setting, determine the verbal and nonverbal skills necessary for the situation, execute those skills in a fluid manner appropriate to social norms, and and effectively perceive the reactions of others and adapt to its feedback. In order to navigate the social world with ease, individuals must be able to assess the sensory input from their environment and respond or adapt their behavior to fit the situation or interaction. It is important to differentiate social competence with social skills. Social skills are the cognitive functions and visual behaviors performed while interacting and communicating with others. Cognitive functions include attention, organization, and memory, as well as higher order spatial processes such as empathy, interpreting social cues, and assessing the potential outcomes of one's social behavior. And those visible behaviors include those verbal and nonverbal actions that are observed during conversations. Essentially, social skills are discrete learned mental operations and visible and observable behaviors, while social competency, on the other hand, is the fluid, natural integration and use of social skills in a way that aligns with the expectations and forms of a given context. So now looking at the 5 foundations of social competence, they include play and social behavior, self-regulation, communication, pro-social skills, and social decision-making. Play and social behavior looks at how the child actively participates in a physical or mental activity to achieve emotional satisfaction. It looks at the categories of play, such as practice, constructive, and symbolic play, and games with rules, as well as the stage of social play, like unaccompanied play behavior, onlooker, solitary, independent, or parallel play, or associative play, and cooperative play. Self-regulation is the internal drive to achieve balance and homeostasis, as we learned so far, and without sensory integration, it is not possible. It includes the arousal, attention, physical control, flexibility, and affect as well. Communication is the process of understanding and sharing meaning through verbal and nonverbal interactions. It includes discourse, pragmatics, speaker-listener responsibilities, and word finding. Pro-social skills are the positive, intentional behaviors that support healthy interaction. These include welcoming the contributions of others, interacting with empathy and understanding, and minimizing conflict and avoiding harm to others' feelings. It includes social behaviors and interpersonal behaviors like helping, sharing, turn-taking, directing conversations, offering invitations to play, and even giving compliments when needed and when necessary. Social decision-making involves the cognitive process to interpret, organize, and navigate social situations. As a higher level thinking skill, it depends heavily on the other foundational aspects of social competence that we just discussed and can be significantly impacted when challenges exist in those areas. And now I'm going to break down the relationship between sensory and each of these foundations. So looking at play and social behavior, sensory processing challenges affect the types of play children engage in. When a child is viewed engaging in an inappropriate stage of play, for their age, such as interacting at a parallel or associative level of play at an age when a cooperative level of play may be expected, it could be due to being dysregulated from the stimuli present in the activity, such as a busy playground noise, presence of other bodies, a lot of visual stimuli, or requirements of the use of equipment like playing with sand or dirt when they have tactile defensiveness, or spinning on a tire swing when they are over-responsive to vestibular input. This is also possible if they are unable to develop or access the skills required of the activity, like having difficulty sequencing or coordinating their body when pumping on a swing, limiting their social engagement when playing on the swings. These processing challenges affect the choice of friends children choose to have, and this is when the child does not have age-appropriate friendships and prefer to be with older or younger peers to feel safer in a more predictable or less intense activity or environment compared to those with same age peers. Sensory processing challenges affect the selection of activities children have in their repertoire, and this is when the choice of activity does not match the interest of same-age peers, like enjoying toys intended for younger kids, or they want to play familiar activities over and over again, which is very common with children who experience praxis challenges, as new activities are harder to execute and carry a sense of unpredictability in the outcome. Their degree of playfulness is affected by sensory processing challenges. Playfulness traits include joy, creativity, imagination, and flexibility, and oftentimes the energy level to support them is lost with stress or excessive challenges, which could be brought on through challenges with problem solving the activity, requiring those praxis skills, and feeling stressed due to increased arousal or dysregulation from the sensory environment. Sensory processing challenges can be seen by a flat or sad affect, frustration, lethargy, lack of captivation in the excitement of others, failure to see the humor and fun in situations, and the absence of novelty in play. We see this in people who call games not fun anymore when they can't really execute the effective or desired outcome. This limits the social engagement with others in the activity, and it bleeds into motivation and interest, where children with sensory processing challenges have low or inconsistent motivation and interest, and with a lack of persistence and not seeing tasks through the end due to the challenge of planning and executing motor actions or tasks effectively to achieve that desired outcome. If the desired outcome is readily not achieved, the motivation and increase is also decreased. Now looking at self-regulation, sensory processing challenges impact arousal and attention in response to sensory input, as we mentioned back when discussing modulation, and this affects their ability to maintain attention and interact with their environment appropriately. Dysregulation causes arousal levels to be too high or too low or inconsistent, impacting the sensory nervous system's ability to filter and prioritize, attending to the important positive stimuli that are often in conversations and play, affecting social participation and learning. The challenges also impact nonverbal communication, as it stems from decreased body schema and sensory discrimination, affecting their ability to recognize their proximity to others by being too close or too distant, accurately interpreting visual input of the nonverbal communication or gestures of peers, and their difficulty resisting the urge to touch or bump into others to gain more tactile and proprioceptive inputs. They also miss or misinterpret nonverbal communication from others due to challenges with modulation of the stimuli, and this decreased body schema and awareness also challenges the nonverbal communication as they display towards others that is contextually appropriate. These praxis challenges may also result in awkward or uncoordinated social gestures and the inability to adapt behavior on subtle social or sensory feedback from others. Sensory processing challenges impact their activity level when they express levels that are too high or too low for given activities, like when an energy level is too low for fast-paced sports or too high for games that involve little movement, or have activity levels that impact their ability to plan and execute movements with appropriate speed, rhythm, or timing within that spatial demand. This can deter peers from wanting to play that activity with them because their activity levels do not match that desired level for that specific activity. Looking at emotional regulation, sensory processing challenges are expressed by heightened or diminished emotional responses due to challenged integration of those sensory systems, leaving that central nervous system to feel overwhelmed, triggering emotional lability and affective tone. And this leads to difficulty regulating those feelings of dysregulation. Praxis challenges leave the child with difficulty navigating their feelings of stress and dysregulation and how to adapt their behavior or environment to feel better and more regulated. Sensory processing challenges also impact their ability to monitor their tone of voice due to the unawareness of how their volume of voice is projecting and if the quality of voice is reflective of how they are feeling in the moment or if it is breathy or piercing. These challenges impact their ability to be flexible in thought and behavior by presenting rigid, repetitious, or controlling behavior. They often have problems with transitioning and shifting attention between activities due to feeling overwhelmed or dysregulated from the modulation difficulties when confronted with unexpected changes in that sensory input. These children seek predictability and routine to maintain that sense of control in their environment, leading to resistance to change or engaging in novel tasks. Now, looking at communication, sensory processing challenges impact discourse skills, including initiation, sustaining, and appropriately shifting conversational topics by missing subtle verbal and nonverbal communication cues. They could feel overstimulated by the dynamic environment, which also negatively impacts their attention to the communicative situation. And this may result in disrupted conversational rhythm, abrupt topic shifts, or failure to respond appropriately to changes in the discourse. Praxis challenges can lead to difficulty initiating the conversation topics, as well as repairing breakdowns in the conversation. Sensory processing challenges could impact pragmatic skills by making it difficult to request, comment on, share, describe, and clarify information, while also being able to appropriately express disagreement. These skills are essential for achieving functional communication in social contexts and problems with integrating sensory integration, and it can make it hard to recognize and interpret social cues from others, sequence the flow of language, and adapt to the interruptions of the interaction. It also impacts the ability to provide clear messages by disorganized sequencing, poor progression from beginning to end, omission of critical information due to assumptions of shared knowledge, or challenges attending to maintain the expression of thought, or providing too much information with excessive detail that overwhelms the listener, and their ability to recognize the feedback of others dependent on their ability to process the visual information from their peers. Sensory processing challenges also impact communicative turn-taking by having challenges with accurately processing and responding to verbal input, tracking shifts in conversation with multiple partners, regulate arousal and attention, which may result in passive withdrawal or leading to dominating the conversation. And they may also struggle to generate a timely or contextually appropriate response, resist transitioning to the conversation to peers due to the difficulty of holding on to and sequencing thoughts, as well as be able to adapt conversation styles across settings or with different partners. These processing challenges also impact storytelling, particularly in narrating personal experiences in a socially meaningful and engaging way. This could be done by not detecting the listener's cues regarding awareness to the story, becoming overwhelmed by interruptions or changes, leading to frustration or rigid communication patterns, and have difficulty planning a structured beginning to end narrative where they might drift off topic or include too many irrelevant details. And looking at its impact on persuasion, leading to difficulty communicating to achieve personal ambitions and attempting to persuade others to agree or act on their behalf. And this is done by having poor sequencing and execution of persuasive dialogue, leading to abrupt or ineffective communication attempts, or missed subtle cues such as tone of voice, facial expression, or body language, which are crucial for adjusting persuasive approaches, which results in reduced participation in collaborative peer activities where, oh, lost my spot, sorry, where self-advocacy may be necessary, especially in group settings requiring negotiation and shared decision-making. Now, looking at sensory's impact challenges on pro-social skills, particularly in greeting others appropriately. This could be done by failing to notice the appropriate timing or context of agreeing or entrance into a social activity, missing nonverbal cues that signal openness to interaction, and potentially experiencing a sense of overstimulation that prevents them from accessing the skills necessary for greetings. Challenges in this area could be due to difficulty generating a greeting, sequencing the interaction where it feels timely and reciprocal, and challenges reading feedback to adjust to the interaction appropriately. Looking at its ability to give and receive feedback in social situations by having difficulty organizing their thoughts and actions during feedback conversations due to overstimulation of the environment around them, and increased arousal during stressful situations that often come with structured feedback, both of which could lead to disorganized or conflicting communication. Bless you. They also might not recognize nonverbal cues from others to stop talking or subtle emotional expressions that indicate feedback is being given. Sensory processing challenges impact the ability to ask for and provide information. By not recognizing the need for additional information and therefore not asking for it, they may struggle to perceive social boundaries or norms, leading them to approach the wrong person for that additional information. They could also be overwhelmed by that sensory stimuli or the lack of social awareness to determine the best person to ask. When providing information, the child may have difficulty generating the idea of what to say, as well as expressing the information in an organized manner with the efficient tone of voice, timing, and sequencing of language to social contexts. The language use may also vary depending on if they are talking to a peer or to a teacher, for instance. Processing challenges impact extending an offer for inclusion due to potential overstimulation from the environment, making it hard for the individuals to manage their feelings of frustration, excitement, or anxiety, which could result in expressing demanding or abrupt initiations to others, or avoid invitations entirely due to a negative modulation response from that overwhelming sensory input. This may also challenge the ability to recognize and adjust their language and emotional response. Extending an invitation to others in a socially appropriate way requires the skill necessary to plan and carry out that right verbal or nonverbal cues. Sensory processing challenges impact negotiating conflict solutions by potentially not recognizing the emotional intensity of the situation and either avoid it or escalate it without noticing. These challenges can lead to impulsivity and frustration, making the reaction or response too quickly without considering others' perspectives, and difficulty with this cognitive flexibility and motor planning may make it hard for the child to adjust their behavior or engage in give and take during conflict. This could result in an inability to negotiate and instead either shut down or dominate the situation, often with little understanding of how to compromise. And finally, looking at how sensory processing challenges impact their ability to follow rules made by other people. And this is often challenged by potentially struggling to accept external rules and attempt to avoid them completely or try to negotiate or modify them to fit their own way of thinking or performing the tasks due to their challenges with motor planning and following structured tasks. The process of social decision-making is very similar to the main constructs of praxis, which involve recognizing a problem or challenge, generating ideas or options on what to do with an inherent plan for how to complete them, considering the consequences of each, actually selecting a plan of action, implementing the option through execution, and finally evaluating the results to ensure that it was the best option and be able to adapt if necessary. Sensory processing challenges impact a child's ability to engage in social decision-making by potentially becoming overwhelmed by that sensory input of the environment, making it hard to focus on social cues, or the sensory defensiveness to environmental input may lead to impulsive responses, which could lead to praxis challenges by struggling to organize those thoughts and planning effective actions that can then hinder the execution of plans due to coordination issues necessary to carry out those actions. And these challenges can make it difficult for the child to evaluate the outcomes of their actions and learn from social experience, which often result in social misunderstandings, conflict, or withdrawal, affecting the child's ability to build and maintain relationships. So together, sensory and praxis challenges can disrupt the child's ability to engage meaningfully in reciprocal play, engage behaviors and emotions in social settings, read and respond to social cues, and practice and refine social skills in a natural play context. All of these influence the natural fluidity and access to the skills required to achieve social competence. Because play is the foundation of social learning, disruptions here create a ripple effect on the development of higher level social competencies such as empathy, cooperation, communication, and decision-making. Behaviors associated with dysregulation or dyspraxia during play activities can be misunderstood by peers as disruptive, leading to social isolation. as we shift our thinking by taking these concepts and relationships and applying them to practice, it is important to remember that social competency is a learned behavior, and learning is dependent on the ability to process and integrate sensation to plan and organize through appropriate behavior. Decreased ability to process and integrate sensation results in difficulty producing appropriate actions, which in turn interfere with learning and behavior. Therapists should model expected behaviors and responses that are readable and associated with social competence so the individual can ensure proper learning. Now, looking back at this model, we can see how the integration of these sensory systems is required to access those higher level outputs like coordination and executing purposeful activity, looking at that praxis piece, and then the end products, including self-control, self-esteem, and ability to concentrate, all of which are necessary to engage in play activities and socialize with others. So looking at our intervention areas of focus, it is important to look at sensory modulation strategies, praxis support, sensory-based motor play, social engagement models and imitation, as well as regulating strategies. And before we dive into those specific intervention areas, I want to touch on the Just Right challenge and ensure that it is incorporated into each of the interventions we discuss. The Just Right challenge is achieved by adjusting the task to an optimal level of difficulty, where the child is encouraged to develop new foundational skills in a supportive environment. This approach supports self-directed thinking and adaptive behavior while enhancing that sensory processing, motor planning, and problem-solving aspects within the activity with help from the guidance of the treating therapist. This Just Right challenge in these interventions should ensure that sensory input is modulated just right, just enough to promote and borderline challenge engagement without causing distress. This balance allows children to stay regulated and participate more fully in the task, promoting emotional regulation and enhancing sensory integration skills to further support praxis. This is done by providing tasks that are appropriately difficult to encourage ideation and planning for a concept and applying the motor coordination, sequencing, and execution of skills necessary to complete the activity. So sensory modulation strategies aim to regulate the sensory input to maintain an optimal state of arousal and focus, which is not new. We talked about this a couple times before. Deep pressure activities assist in regulating individuals who are hypersensitive to touch or display hyperactivity or distractibility, particularly in situations where tactile input leads to dysregulation. Deep pressure input activates the deep part of the nervous system responsible for calming and relaxation. This can help reduce that flight, fight, or fright response triggered by that overstimulation, creating a sense of safety and calm for individuals who are hypersensitive to touch. The use of interventions including weighted blankets or vests, body socks, hugging stuffed animals tightly and crawling through tunnels, heavy objects or big pillows to provide squeezes between them can help the child feel more grounded and calm, promoting emotional regulation, self-awareness through this organizing input. It also helps the brain process and integrate touch input more effectively, making it easier to tolerate other forms of touch and sensory experiences without feeling overwhelmed or overstimulated. Heavy work assists the child in becoming more aware of their body and space. This improves the ability to track and control movement, promoting better coordination and positively affecting praxis, which helps with coordination and balance. It can also offer a reset for the nervous system to reduce hyperactivity and emotional dysregulation, making it easier for the individual to focus and feel calm. When engaging in exercises like pushing, pulling, carrying heavy objects, jumping on a trampoline, climbing, wheelbarrow walking, and propelling their body weight on a scooter board, the body receives intense, deep pressure and movement signals within the muscles and joints that have a calming and organizing effect on that nervous system. Combining proprioceptive input with other forms of sensory feedback, like vestibular input from jumping or movement on a scooter board, helps to integrate multiple sensory systems, promoting overall sensory processing and integration. Swinging and spinning and the use of sensory swings, rocking chairs, and balance boards to provide that linear, angular, or rotational vestibular input, helps with body awareness, postural support, and balance. Swinging helps an individual become more aware of how their body moves through space and can address posture and muscle tone. This awareness facilitates learning how to adjust their body position or movements to achieve specific outcomes, such as maintaining balance while seated or using arms and legs to propel a swing. It is important to keep in mind that slow, rhythmic, linear movements of the swing help regulate balance and spatial awareness, aiding with emotional regulation and attention. And faster, more unpredictable swinging motions, such as spinning or tilting the swing, can help individuals who need to increase alertness or engage more fully with their surroundings. Swing and push-pull activities involve the individual to push or pull on a rope or another swing. This can also be used to access both vestibular and proprioceptive input. A sensory diet is the implementation of a structured routine of sensory activities designed to meet a child's sensory needs to maintain an optimal state of arousal and focus. Adding adaptive equipment like noise-canceling headphones, fidgets, move and sit cushions, or scheduling movement breaks, or implementing any of these strategies that we have discussed so far can be incorporated within a sensory diet to promote homeostasis and regulation of behavior and arousal. Looking at praxis support, sorry, just checking the time. Okay. So looking at praxis support. While it is essential to evaluate processing challenges through formal assessment, it is equally important to observe how individuals respond to stimuli, interact with others and objects, and adapt to changing environmental demands. To promote sensory integration and support praxis development, the intervention sessions should include provision of sensory input to address praxis deficits, encouraging active participation in sensory motor activities. The intervention should be child-directed, allow the child to initiate, plan, and execute motor activities. But however, the therapist should be providing structure and modifying the environment to provide that just right challenge in preparation for them to facilitate an adaptive response. An example of this is through an obstacle course that utilizes equipment relevant to sensory motor experiences like tunnels to crawl through in quadruped, trampolines to jump on, objects designed to be pulled or pushed on, object to jump over, walk across, crash, and so forth. To ensure a child is directing the activity, they could assemble the course by choosing what to incorporate. However, with respect to the just right challenge, the therapist will be able to provide the most appropriate choices of equipment for the child to utilize within their obstacle course, given their ability to process and integrate their incoming sensory integration in the systems of tactile, vestibular, and proprioception. This boils down to the amount of choices they are providing, the level of complexity required of the equipment, and the intensity of which the equipment will provide. Finally, in the phase of facilitating an adaptive response, the child must then execute the required actions of the course they assembled in the correct sequence and motor coordination. This activity incorporated many somatosensory components that influence the skills required within praxis. It addressed ideation by having the child plan and organize the individual pieces of the equipment into the obstacle course. It also involved motor coordination and heavy work as the child moved and positioned the equipment in the desired locations. The activity required sequencing and timing to engage in the correct order of the course, along with the integration of sensory input and execution of the body movements required for each obstacle. Additionally, it engaged higher level functions such as concentration, behavior regulation, and emotional control as various sensory inputs are processed within the central nervous system. Ultimately, this activity promotes self-confidence as the child successfully executes the adaptive response required to complete the course as they set it up themselves. This activity itself can be modified to address those functions of social competency as well by taking turns with the child to assemble or go through the obstacle course. The interactions can be designed to incorporate those pro-social skills or social decision making, as well as promoting effective communication between the child themselves and the treating therapist. Play is crucial for engagement of younger individuals and sensory-based motor play in particular supports. Integration of sensory input by engaging various sensory systems. For example, activities like swinging can provide vestibular input, which will enhance balance and spatial orientation. Tactile-based activities such as playing through Play-Doh or slime, submerging themselves in a ball pit, or incorporating brushing techniques could support tactile discrimination and proprioception through that increased strength and awareness in the muscles or joints, developing body awareness and coordination. And you can also improve body scheme through activities that incorporate that deep touch pressure and heavy work, as we have discussed, and also improve that bilateral integration and sequencing through activities with vestibular proprioceptive activities. Input, I should mean, instead of activities. It supports self-regulation by helping children manage their emotion and behavioral responses via sensory modulation. Activities like yoga or deep breathing techniques assist in calming strategies and focus. Obstacle courses can provide those opportunities for practice motor planning and sequencing, fostering the development of organizational skills, as we discussed. Weighted blankets or compression garments deliver that deep touch pressure input, providing regulation and calming through overstimulating situations. It also supports self-regulation of behaviors and motor actions like building structures with blocks, for example. It encourages the children to reflect on their actions and make adjustments using internal dialogue, like if this is here, will it stay balanced? And pretend play, such as role play, like a teacher or a doctor, fosters problem solving and cognitive processing as children think through social scenarios and develop strategies for action independently. Sensory-based motor play supports social interaction skills and facilitating the development of peer relationships through sensory-based motor activities. Group activities like Simon Says, red light, green light, they can support the development of social reciprocity, turn taking, and following directions. Collaborative play, like relay races, can require teamwork, while collaborative play, like relay races, require teamwork, while activities like parachute play promote cooperation, communication, and shared problem solving all fall into that collaborative play. And lastly, it supports cognitive skills necessary for academic success as narrative development and reading comprehension. Dramatic play allows the child to act out stories, supporting the understanding of story structure and sequencing. Sequencing activities like story cards or puzzles can help children organize the events in order, promoting those skills essential for understanding stories. And interactive books with tactile elements can provide that multisensory experience, reinforcing comprehension and ability to recall key story details. Both social engagement models and imitation play a critical role in helping children with sensory integration and praxis challenges, and could be addressed in games that require coordination or teamwork in a social context, like I mentioned, such as parachute play, tug of war, or a group obstacle course, could support children's ability to plan and execute coordinated actions in collaboration with others to achieve a common goal. Most cooperative games involve heavy work providing proprioceptive input that is calming and helps prepare the body for activities supporting focused attention. This, in turn, supports sustained collaboration and engagement with teammates. Games that involve role play and dramatic play, such as pretend play, superheroes, or grocery store simulations, support sensory integration and praxis by providing tactile input through multi-textured materials like costumes or toys, as well as vestibular proprioceptive input through unfamiliar motor actions, like when a child has to pretend to be superheroes or run a store. They can use fine motor skills or gross motor coordination to act out tasks that are unfamiliar, like counting money, handing over items, or moving objects. These activities support sequencing and motor coordination in functional, unfamiliar motor contexts. Games that require social interaction skills, such as board games or puzzles, can be supported by working towards recognizing visual, auditory, and tactile cues. For example, visual timers and first then boards can help children with turn taking and sequencing, while physical prompts can provide proper hand gestures or interpreting nonverbal communication. Additionally, encouraging children to verbally plan or discuss their steps during structured group activities supports ideation and sequencing of motor constructs, social constructs, excuse me. Imitation games such as Follow the Leader, Mirror, or Simon Says could incorporate actions like stretching, posing, clapping, hopping, and jumping. And these activities can help process sensory input while promoting motor planning and coordination. These intervention provides opportunities for sensory processing and motor planning, which are essential for children to engage socially, follow social rules, and interact effectively with others. Through structured play, children practice integrating sensory input while learning to coordinate motor movements and imitate behaviors, ultimately fostering better social understanding and competencies. Social engagement and imitation models not only support social skill development, but also offer crucial opportunities for children to practice sensory integration and praxis, helping them process that sensory input, plan actions, and navigate social interaction successfully. And finally, looking at regulation strategies. Similar to the modulation strategies, regulating strategies are more about providing the child with tools to manage sensory overload, plan motor actions, and maintain emotional balance during activities. Box breathing, breathing techniques including diaphragmatic breathing, box breathing, and visual breathing may help support the child to control their arousal levels and reduce overstimulating responses to sensory information coming in from the environment. This can be used before or during activities that require sustained attention, motor planning, or social interaction to enhance regulation. Mindfulness, focusing specifically on body awareness, may help the child develop awareness of their sensory state and regulate their reactions. Questions like how do your feet feel on the ground, or can you feel your hands moving in the air, can help the children self-regulate by increasing their body awareness, which in turn supports motor planning and organizing sensory input during play when they begin to feel their arousal level begin to heighten. On the opposite end, having regular movement breaks like jumping jacks, dancing, swinging, or partaking in any free movement to get the wiggles out can help provide vestibular and proprioceptive input to help regulate emotional and sensory states and reset their sensory systems, especially when they are overwhelmed or overstimulated, in preparation for them to engage in more structured tasks like sitting and focusing in school or low activity games. Altering the environment with modifications like areas for calming sounds, visuals, fidgets, minimal light, soft seating to sit or lay can all help the child feel more regulated and focused, which enhances their ability to engage in social and motor tasks. So, rounding up here, you want to give these individuals opportunities to succeed. During the interventions for children with social competency challenges, it is important to regulate their bodies by providing organizing sensory inputs before interactions. Additionally, offering opportunities for self-directed coping throughout the session can also help maintain their regulation and support access to the skills needed to the foundations of social competency. They can learn what activities and movements make them feel more regulated and organized as they experience them through interventions and repeated throughout the therapeutic plan of care. It is important to keep in mind that when sensory processing and motor coordination areas are challenged, the brain focuses on trying to regulate and reach homeostasis, leaving very little energy to support social and play domains. With a regulated system comes access to the social and play domains required to build social connections through social competency. So be patient as progress in these areas is complex and not linear. Prepare to be flexible as the activities you choose may have to be modified based on the child's sensory needs and motor abilities in that moment, and provide breaks for regulation as needed to support continued engagement and find that just right challenge. And these are my references. Thank you. What questions do you have, if any?